we'll start with this. Chantel Cameron, reigning unified super lightweight champion Chantel Cameron, reached out to her fellow champion Kaylee Rice via social media and asked, "I've been told you're not ready. I'm fighting in May. Are you going to be ready for May? All the belts?" To which Kaylee Rice replied, "Still currently waiting on issues to be resolved, unfortunately. Trust me, I want nothing more than to get in there at 100% and put on a great scrap for all the hardware, girl. It will happen." And, that's Kaylee providing some reassurance that the fight will take place, that the fight will happen. For those of you not aware, Kaylee Rice is experiencing some sort of a medical issue, though it's an undisclosed medical issue. We don't know what the issue is. And it's crystal clear that Chantel will be fighting in May, just not against Kaylee. So who will it be? There's no shortage of opponent options for Chantel Cameron at 140 pounds. There are plenty of girls to choose from, though not many girls with a profile, that's the thing. And I'm pretty sure that Chantel Cameron, she wants to fighting meaningful fights and big fights. Not that long ago, Eddie Hearn hinted at a potential Jessica McCaskill fight. Jessica McCaskill, who's one division north of Chantel at 147 pounds. She's that division's undisputed champion. And, I've talked about that potential fight. And the more I think about it, the more feasible it seems, because...
It makes sense.
Think about it this way. Both Chantel Cameron and Jessica McCaskill, the both of them, they'd like to get the winner of Taylor versus Serrano in the ring, especially if the winner is Katie Taylor.
They've got common goals.
Katie Taylor herself mentioned the both of them as potential opponent options beyond the Amanda Serrano fight. You think about that, you think about how Jessica McCaskill very recently signed a multi-fight promotional deal with Matchroom.
Right.
Matchroom's got to get her fights.
She already fought in a Keep Busy fight last year against Candy Wyatt.
So for her next fight, they might want to step it up a bit. Step it up to Chantel Cameron, perhaps. They both have common goals. They both want the same thing. They both want a Katie Taylor fight, but they can't both get her. Not at the same time. So what if they lock horns with each other to take out the competition? The prescribed weight of the match is the only question. Would a fight like that happen at 140 pounds?
Where Chantel has 2 belts?
Or would it happen at 147 pounds, where Jessica McCaskill holds all the marbles, all the belts?
A fight between them would be fireworks.
The come-forward aggression and toughness, the punching power of Jessica McCaskill versus the mean streak and polished boxing of Chantel Cameron.
Can she bull and Matador it the way that Katie Taylor bull and Matador it years ago?
Or could Jessica McCaskill prove to be too much, too tough for Chantel Cameron? That's the question.
Pressure busts pipes.
And that's what Jessica McCaskill applies. That's her calling card. Non-stop pressure. From the opening bell to the final bell. Does Chantel Cameron have the feet for this fight?
Because Jessica McCaskill's going to come right at her.
They are two very aggressive fighters, two very aggressive punchers. They have that in common.
Yeah, I think there's a chance they might fight, I do.
And it's mostly because of what Chantel Cameron said in that rather amicable exchange between herself and Kaylee Rice. They're looking to get Chantel out there in May. That's 5 months into the year of 2022. 5 months into the year of 2022, you want to set up something decent size, something big for the fighters. Jessica McCaskill just signed a multi-fight deal last year with Matchroom, and she's already had her first fight under that deal. They would presumably step her up after that, one would think.
I ain't pulling this idea out of my ass. Eddie Hearn's the one that put it out there.
Some weeks ago, and we talked about it here on the channel. If things are still murky for the undisputed super lightweight title fight between Chantel and Kaylee, maybe they throw Chantel in there with Jessica. It makes sense. Makes sense for both, because both Chantel and Jessica, they both have a profile. Jessica can stay upstairs at 147 pounds, satisfying mandatory challengers like Alma Ibarra. But a fight with an Alma Ibarra, that does come with risks. The kind of risks that maybe don't pay you the same way a Chantel Cameron fight would pay you. So for taking risks with Alma, you might as well fight Chantel.
I'm just telling you, don't be surprised if this ends up being Chantel Cameron's next fight.
Her next fight in May. And what's Matchroom gonna have going on in May? Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol, ring a bell?
I wouldn't be surprised if Alicia Baumgartner makes an appearance on that card.
And just in keeping with the theme of all things Matchroom, Eddie Hearn has declared that he's now made a significant offer to Kell Brook to fight Benn next. He said they'd be willing to do it in June, but thinks a date later in the year is more likely. This would see Benn fighting in April.
April 16th first.
The last we heard in reference to Benn's next fight, his very next fight, is that they were looking at Mighty Mo Hooker, but Mighty Mo, he couldn't participate because he was injured. So they landed on Chris Van Heerden.
So it's Van Heerden in April and Brook in June.
Barring any unforeseen circumstances or physically taxing fights, I don't actually think the Van Heerden fight, if it comes off, if that's who Conor Benn ends up fighting in April. I don't think that's going to be a physically taxing fight for Conor Benn. I'd give Conor very good odds to knock Chris Van Heerden out and move on from that to that Kell Brook fight. But what we're hearing now is preliminary. It's preliminary information, preliminary news. He's made a significant offer to Brook, but Brook may not have accepted it yet. Brook is likely going to weigh his options, what Matchroom has to offer him, and what Sky Sports and Boxer might want to offer him.
Chris Eubank Jr. at a catch weight?
Not likely. Over there at Sky and Boxer, they do have the Albanian king at welterweight, Florian Marku. And Brook versus Marku really is a good little fight, though it doesn't have the same size and pay scale as a Brook versus Benn fight. I mean, let's just be honest here. At this point, Kell Brook is a prize fighter. No more and no less. And you get more bang for your buck with Conor than you do with Florian.
Yeah, you don't make as much money fighting Floridians, Florian.
Flaccid Marku doesn't make you the same money that taking on Conor Benn makes you. So let's just get that right out of the way.
Yeah, you don't make the same money with flatulent that you make with Conor.
It's an interesting fight, an intriguing fight, because we just saw Kell Brook dominate his longtime domestic rival, Amir Khan, in one-sided fashion. But it's deceiving. It's deceptive. Kell Brook dominated today's Amir Khan, but we could see that today's Amir Khan, he had nothing left.
Beating that guy don't mean Kell's found a foul in the youth.
A strong win could have knocked out what's left of today's Amir Khan, if we're being honest. Thus, Kell Brook beating him in the fashion that he beat him, it's
monumental for Kell's legacy and his bragging rights.
But it doesn't effectively communicate what exactly it is that Kell Brook has left, and what would be the contracted weight for the match. Would it be a welterweight contest at 147 pounds, or would it be like the Amir Khan fight, fought just above welterweight at 149, maybe 150?
That's important. Don't overlook that.
I happen to think Kell's more durable as a junior middleweight than he would be a welterweight.
Yeah, I think he'd have better punch resistance.
Kell Brook's got his movement and straight punches, his judicious jab, his straight 1-2, boxing from the outside on the move.
He's got power.
And Conor Benn recently has amassed some experience against a moving target. What we saw in the Adrian Granados fight, who decided to box more than any of us expected him to. The same more recently with Chris Algieri.
Oh, yeah, he's moving around a lot, too.
Right before Conor Benn found him out, scored a highlight reel knockout in what was his very last fight. I very much like the idea of Brook versus Benn.
Well, let's see if Eddie Hearn can't get it over the line.
But it's you need to fight. Yeah, but for me, it don't make sense, right? Because they have nothing to offer me. I just want to continue make history, and they have nothing to offer.
What have I been saying? It's not a coincidence that Canelo Alvarez is now echoing those sentiments himself. Jermall Charlo, David Benavidez, what are they offering him?
Nothing.
No belt, and all the marquee value associated with the fight is being brought to the table by Canelo Alvarez and not them. Canelo's going to do his numbers whether he picks them or he picks somebody else. So what's in it for him?
Nothing.
The amount of mental gymnastics I've been seeing by way of social media as of late, when news broke that Canelo Alvarez was going to be taking on Dimitri Bivol, as opposed to Jermall Charlo, as opposed to David Benavidez. I mean, the amount...
Well, these guys deserve a gold medal for all these mental gymnastics.
There are some out there, a small contingent, a contingent of just a few, who are unhappy that Canelo Alvarez is fighting Dimitri Bivol as opposed to Jermall Charlo and David Benavidez. In truth, these
losers
individuals don't represent the vast majority of fight fans that are perfectly okay with the Dimitri Bivol fight, that are quite content to see Canelo Alvarez get back out there against yet another unbeaten champion. This small contingent of individuals don't represent the majority of fight fans, the paying public that pay for boxing.
It's basic arithmetic.
They are so emotionally compromised. Having become so belligerent, they've stopped talking about boxing altogether.
The reason they're so upset has very little to do with boxing.
They expect Canelo Alvarez's opponent selection to have very little to do with boxing and world titles and more to do with flags and pigment.
Literally.
I'm not kidding around. There's a lot of guys out there think Canelo Alvarez's opponent selection is supposed to be based on facing a certain number of fighters of a certain denomination to satisfy the whims of a few, just a few.
Who aren't even fans of him anyway.
The main reason that this outcry falls on deaf ears is because it's coming from the minority of boxing fans. The majority of boxing fans, the actual paying public that makes up Canelo Alvarez's fan base.
They're perfectly okay with the Bivol fight.
Even if you're not, the fighters you're so high on, the rest of the world, they're not high on them.
We've often talked about why. Those fighters don't fight in fights that people want to see.
So people don't get behind them. If you don't do nothing to separate yourself from your contemporaries, separate yourself from everybody else, or take out the competition, take things into your own hands. If you don't do this...
What do you expect?
Now, Dimitri Bivol's no fan favorite. He's no more popular than Jermall Charlo or David Benavidez. He's not. But he does have something that Canelo Alvarez wants.
What?
A belt.
He's got a belt that Canelo Alvarez can win and they don't.
Because he's naturally bigger than Canelo Alvarez and Jermall Charlo and Dimitri Bivol. Because he's a light heavyweight, fight fans view the contest as interesting.
Simple as.
Contrary to the spin doctors and narrative pushers and what they would have you believe, there is no catch weight, no weight stipulations at all, no rehydration clauses. This is a full-fledged light heavyweight contest.
Oh, you mean there's still people running around pushing those narratives?
It's not that there haven't been catch weights and weight stipulations and rehydration clauses in the past. It's that the past is the past. I don't think Canelo Alvarez has used a rehydration clause since the Kovalev fight. They formally announced that Callum Smith had no rehydration clauses.
The Callum Smith fight.
And that was, what, 3 or 4 fights ago?
So what are these guys complaining about?
I'll tell you what they're complaining about. They're complaining that Canelo Alvarez isn't fighting a specific fighter that they're high on for some reason or another, just so that when Canelo Alvarez beats him...
They're just gonna keep complaining anyway.
And if you don't want to take it from me, you don't believe me, turn your attention to the screen, hotshot!
1 minute the guy says that Caleb Plant would dog walk Canelo Alvarez.
Canelo doesn't want no parts of that guy. Only so that Canelo ends up fighting that guy in post-fight.
Oh, suddenly Caleb wasn't ever any good to begin with, huh?
You can't make this stuff up. You really can't.
Guy's a mental.
Why I could beat?
Почему ты считаешь, что ты победишь?
Because I believe in my skills. Every time when I came to the ring, I believe that I could beat my opponent. And why I couldn't beat him? Of course, he has a lot of fans. It makes him better than me on media. But he's still the man, and he's fighting a lower category than me. And yes, he has power, but I have power too. He has good skills, but my skills is good too.
I believe that Dimitri Bivol, unlike Jermall Charlo, unlike David Benavidez, he wants this fight for the right reasons. I believe that Dimitri Bivol not only
Likes the money.
fancies the purse amount he stands to make from the fight, but I believe he actually likes his chances more so than those fighters do. Those fighters...
They don't want to challenge themselves. They just want to get paid to show up.
Myself, I've been largely indifferent to whatever decision Canelo Alvarez decided to make, whatever opponent he so decided to choose, whether it was Lunga Makabu, Dimitri Bivol, Demetrius Andre, Jermall Charlo, David Benavidez, Joe Smith Jr., Artur Beterbiev, you name it.
Any one of them would have been just fine by me.
Though for those of you that have been following this channel throughout, you will have also heard me say that I believe Dimitri Bivol has the peskier, more frustrating style out of all those aforementioned opponent options, that Dimitri Bivol has more potential to be a banana skin than, say, a Jermall Charlo, a Demetrius Andre, or a David Benavidez.
And I didn't wait till the fight was officially announced to say that.
I've been saying that the whole time.
But it might be some unrest in small circles.
Some fight fans out there, some individuals that claim to be fight fans that are discontent with Dimitri Bivol as Canelo Alvarez's next opponent. They're more partial to the American fighters for the simple fact that they are American as opposed to the actual boxing of it. The fact that Dimitri Bivol is a full-fledged light heavyweight, an unbeaten light heavyweight champion, more durable.
And he actually has a belt that Canelo Alvarez can win. They don't.
The only belt Jermall Charlo holds is in a division where Canelo Alvarez no longer campaigns, and David Benavidez, he lost his belt to the scales over a year ago.
You're gonna start belly aching about Demetrius Andre.
Let me tell you something. Back when Canelo Alvarez was a unified middleweight champion, he actually petitioned to fight Demetrius Andre, but he did not receive approval from the IBF. They wanted him to face his mandatory challenger, Sergey Devianchenko, and that's what he tried to do up until Lou DiBella priced Sergey out of the fight.
At which point the red belt, the IBF title, went vacant.
And Canelo Alvarez set his sights elsewhere, as becoming the middleweight division's undisputed champion was no longer feasible. The rest, as they say, is history.
You're still stuck on that?
Well, get over it, because nobody gives a fuck what you want anyway. What you want is for guys like me to think that Canelo Alvarez is shaking in his boots over Charlo and Andre and Benavidez.
Yeah, that's what you want me to believe.
When last I checked, it was Canelo Alvarez that willfully chose to fight a prime Erislandy Lara. The same Lara Laura that Demetrius Andrade called boring. The same Laura that he never fought. Charlo,
Neither of the Charlo brothers ever found the time to fight Lara.
Canelo Alvarez did back when Erislandy Lara was in his prime, and I could give a fuck what you think about the decision, whether you think Lara deserved it or Canelo deserved it, because either way, that's a guy Canelo fought that they did.
They don't want to test themselves.
Pay their dues the same way that he did. What they want to do is capitalize off of his marquee value, his success, because they know they make more money fighting him than fighting anybody else.
Canelo's moved up from 154 to 160 to 168.
Now he's headed back up to 175 pounds, and when it comes to little old Charlo, it's too much to ask that he move up in weight the same way that Canelo moved up in weight to take on a David Benavidez when Canelo's taking on a Dimitri Bivol.
If Canelo can move up the light heavyweight for Bivol, why can't Charlo move up in weight for Benavidez?
Make it make sense. These are the guys we're supposed to feel sorry for, these underachievers.
Clout chasers.
Near as I can tell, Jim Charlo needs to get busy, needs the money.
Didn't his debit card get declined at a diner last year?
That's embarrassing.
And who's Benavidez fighting? David Lemieux?
The truth is that Canelo Alvarez's critics and this uptick of criticism has everything to do with Canelo Alvarez fighting Bivol as opposed to who those individuals wanted to see him fight, even if
The Dimitri Bivol fight is a more difficult fight than the Charlo
a
fight.
better fight with a better fighter that actually has a world title that Canelo Alvarez can win. Naturally bigger.
And if you don't like it, don't buy it.
Odds are you weren't going to buy it anyway.
That's why what you guys think about boxing don't matter.
You're not paying customers, you're not consumers, thus this uptick of criticism falls on deaf ears.
Look at the numbers for Charlo versus Derevyanchenko on pay-per-view.
For all the bluster and all the hubbub, the uptick of criticisms you see on social media, where were these people when it was time to purchase that fight? Where were they?
You don't support the fighters that you do like.
We're supposed to spend time worrying about the ones you don't?
Kick rocks.
Fuck off with your sob stories and your agendas.
Nobody gives a fuck what you want.
Nobody!
Nobody cares.
Because fighters like Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez insist on fighting in these uninteresting fights, nobody's gonna care. Nobody's gonna watch.
You keep arguing online about it.
It's not gonna change anything. Canelo Alvarez doesn't need your respect. He has the respect of the paying public.
Doesn't need your approval.